The rain fell silently over Manhattan, a steady drizzle that painted the streets in muted reflections of neon signs and traffic lights. Benjamin Hard sat in his loft, the soft glow of the fireplace illuminating the edges of his meticulously organized study. Outside, the city moved with its usual relentless pace, unaware of the storm quietly brewing in the heart of the metropolis. Inside, the storm was different. It had arrived in the form of a single envelope, black and unmarked, left at his door without a sound. Benjamin studied it carefully, noting the absence of any stamp, no handwriting, no sign of its origin. He allowed his fingers to linger on the envelope, feeling the weight of its promise, something urgent, something dangerous. He had long ago learned that the simplest mysteries often contained the deepest threats. With deliberate calm, he opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of heavy cream paper, the text written in precise, almost clinical handwriting. "Mr. Hard, you are needed. The situation is delicate, and the authorities have reached their limit. Time is critical. Visit 12, East 72nd Street at once. Ask for Mr. Whitaker. Trust no one." Benjamin's eyes narrowed. Whitaker. The name resonated faintly in the recesses of his memory. An art collector, known for his exquisite taste and exclusive auctions. Not the sort of man who would summon a private detective without good reason. But the handwriting, the tone, the urgency, they all spoke of more than a missing person or a stolen painting. This was a prelude to something far more sinister. He poured himself a cup of green tea, the steam curling like ghostly fingers in the dim light of the loft, and allowed himself a moment to consider. His mind worked in layers, each possibility branching into dozens of subplots, each more complex than the last. He had always trusted his instincts, and the instincts now told him that this was no ordinary summons. This was a puzzle, and he loved puzzles. Pulling on his long, tailored coat, Benjamin left his apartment, the familiar weight of his leather briefcase against his side. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a thin mist, obscuring the sharp lines of the city. He walked with measured steps, each one a silent declaration of confidence. Despite the cold, his mind burned with anticipation. The streets of Manhattan had their own rhythm, a symphony of chaos, but Benjamin moved like a conductor who already knew the score. By the time he reached East 72nd Street, the city had grown quieter, the usual chatter reduced to distant echoes. The building loomed before him, an old brownstone with a facade that hinted at grandeur long faded. He entered, the air inside thick with the scent of aged wood and polished brass. The elevator ride was slow, each floor a quiet reminder that suspense was a matter of patience. Whitaker awaited him in a drawing room that smelled faintly of cedar and varnish. The collector was an imposing man, tall and lean, with eyes that flickered like candlelight in their intensity. "Mr. Hard," he said, voice measured but urgent. "Thank you for coming. I'm afraid the situation is complicated. I cannot involve the police." "Not yet." Benjamin inclined his head slightly, his eyes scanning every detail of the room, the positioning of the furniture, the subtle signs of disarray, the faint scorch marks along the edges of the fireplace mantel. Each detail was a note in the overture of a story, and Benjamin was determined to read every one of them. "What happened?" he asked, voice calm, almost detached, though every fiber of his being was alert. Whitaker hesitated, then handed him a small envelope, identical in size and secrecy to the one Benjamin had received. "It's him," Whitaker said simply. "I disappeared, not from the world, but into something much darker. Benjamin, you must find him before it's too late." Benjamin took the envelope, his fingers brushing against a weighty certainty. He had been summoned, yes, but more than that, he had been challenged. And challenges were what he lived for. Outside, the rain persisted, a steady drumbeat against the windows, as if the city itself awaited his next move. Benjamin Hard tucked the envelope into his coat and stepped back into the misty streets. Somewhere in Manhattan, a life hung in the balance, and he would unravel the threads that led to the truth, one careful step at a time. The morning air was sharp, carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant fires that had long been extinguished. Benjamin Hard arrived at the scene just as the first investigators were retreating from the charred remains of Whitaker's apartment. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, and the city's usual hum seemed muted, as if acknowledging the gravity of what had occurred. Benjamin's eyes, steel-cold and methodical, scanned the building's facade and the burned remnants of the interior. He stepped past the tape, nodding politely to the fire officers who glanced at him with curiosity, their hands busy with soot-stained gloves. The apartment, once a sanctuary of fine art and elegance, now resembled a mausoleum. Blackened walls bore witness to the flames, smoke curling in stubborn tendrils from the corners where fire had licked the woodwork. The scent of charred paper and melted varnish filled the air, an invisible testament to destruction. Benjamin crouched near the hearth, observing the subtle clues left behind by the chaos. A single copper coin lay amidst the ashes, almost polished in its insignificance. He picked it up carefully, inspecting its engravings, the faint wear that suggested decades of handling. The coin seemed out of place, an artifact too deliberate to be random. He tucked it into his coat pocket, a quiet addition to his growing collection of trophies from each investigation. His gaze shifted to a crumpled piece of paper, partially singed but still legible. Written in French, it read like a fragmented warning: "Ne laissez personne entrer, ils observant, let no one enter, they are watching." Benjamin's mind worked instantly, translating the urgency and the fear embedded in the short message. It wasn't just a clue, it was a cry, a plea, a warning. He noticed traces of an unfamiliar substance smeared near the fireplace, dark and viscous, resisting simple identification. Benjamin's fingers brushed it lightly, the texture rough, almost crystalline, yet sticky in a way that suggested a chemical origin. He had seen many substances in his time, from innocuous powders to poisons, and something about this felt deliberately staged. Whoever had been here had wanted the apartment to burn, but they had left markers, subtle and precise, for someone who knew how to read them. Walking slowly through the rooms, he catalogued the remnants of Whitaker's life. A broken sculpture lay in the corner, splintered wood jutting out like skeletal fingers. Paintings, partially singed, clung stubbornly to the walls, their vibrant colors muted by soot. Benjamin's eyes traced the patterns of the destruction, reconstructing in his mind how the fire had spread, what had been targeted, and what had been preserved. Every detail mattered. Every anomaly told a story. By the time he reached Whitaker's private study, Benjamin's attention sharpened. The safe, normally a pristine steel rectangle in the wall, had been torn from its hinges, its contents missing. The meticulous handwriting of the letters on the desk, scattered in disarray, hinted at hurried removal rather than mere accident. There was intent here, a carefully orchestrated chaos designed to obscure as much as to destroy. He paused near the window, the city stretching endlessly beyond. The rain had stopped, leaving streets glistening with reflections of neon and streetlights. A single thought formed in his mind: this was no ordinary burglary, no impulsive act of violence. The layers of deception were too intricate, the timing too precise. Someone wanted Whitaker's disappearance to seem accidental, but they had underestimated the observer in the shadows, Benjamin Hard. He exhaled slowly, letting the faint warmth of his own resolve counter the chill of the ruined apartment. Each clue, each fragment of the scene, was a thread, and Benjamin knew he would follow them to the very heart of the deception. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious, but inside the charred remains, a detective was already piecing together a story that no fire could erase. Benjamin's next steps were clear: find the missing man, decode the clues left in ash and smoke, and uncover who had orchestrated this inferno with such precise malice. Somewhere, hidden in the ruins and the shadows of Manhattan, the truth waited, and Benjamin Hard would not rest until he found it. The gallery was quiet, almost oppressively so, the polished wooden floors echoing Benjamin Hard's footsteps with a soft, deliberate rhythm. Whitaker's collection had been his sanctuary, a place where beauty, history, and value intertwined. Now, it felt like a cathedral abandoned to shadows, the scent of varnish and oil paint mingling with the faint trace of smoke that clung stubbornly to the walls. Benjamin's eyes swept over the room, cataloguing every painting, every sculpture, every subtle imperfection in the arrangement of the exhibits. It wasn't the destruction he was interested in. That was obvious. What mattered were the nuances, what had been untouched, what had been preserved, and what, perhaps, had been placed deliberately to communicate something only someone trained to observe would notice. He noted the positioning of a bronze statuette, slightly askew, the faint scratches on its base suggesting it had been moved recently. The subtle alignment of paintings along the wall hinted at a path someone had followed, a path Benjamin intended to retrace. As he moved through the gallery, whispers of the elite art world brushed against him. The city's collectors and critics were creatures of habit and ego, often blind to the motives of those outside their circles. Benjamin had spent years studying them, understanding their desires, their secrets, and, most importantly, their lies. Every glance he received from the staff or the occasional visitor told a story, a glimpse of fear, curiosity, or concealed guilt. And tonight, he was listening. A slender man in a tailored suit approached, his movements cautious yet practiced. "Mr. Hard, I presume?" he asked, his voice smooth, but with an underlying tension that betrayed concern. "I'm Laurent, assistant to Mr. Whitaker. I can show you what remains." Benjamin's gaze didn't waver. "Show me everything, and leave nothing out," he said. His tone carried no impatience, only precision, the kind that demanded truth without question. Laurent nodded and led him to a side room, where several crates had survived the fire relatively unscathed. Inside were fragments of paintings, carefully wrapped in protective cloths, and a small collection of rare sculptures. Benjamin inspected each piece, noting the selection with meticulous care. Someone had chosen what to destroy and what to save, and the pattern was deliberate, almost like a signature. "What about security footage?" Benjamin asked. Laurent's face tightened. "The cameras were disabled the night of the fire. It had to be planned." Benjamin's mind worked instantly, reconstructing possibilities. This was not random. Whoever had orchestrated the fire knew exactly what they were doing. The layers of intent, the precise execution, it all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of Whitaker's routines, someone who understood the value of chaos as a distraction. His attention shifted to a painting partially hidden behind a crate. The brushwork was distinct, almost imperceptibly different from the rest of the collection. Benjamin crouched, examining the canvas closely. There was a faint mark, a signature perhaps, or a symbol, a clue left in plain sight. It was the kind of detail only a trained eye could spot, and Benjamin's memory stored it instantly, linking it to the larger puzzle unfolding before him. Laurent watched him, hesitant. "Mr. Hard, you realize how dangerous this is, don't you?" Benjamin straightened, his presence imposing, eyes scanning the gallery as though he could see through walls. "Danger is part of the job, Laurent. What matters is understanding the patterns. Understanding the people. And understanding the lies." The gallery seemed to hold its breath, the weight of history and secrecy pressing against Benjamin's resolve. Somewhere in the shadows of Manhattan, the orchestrator of the fire watched, confident that their trail was cold. But Benjamin Hard was not so easily deceived. Each clue, each misstep, each whisper of fear, he would follow them all. The city might sleep, oblivious, but he was awake, piecing together a story written in shadows, smoke, and subtle hints of betrayal. Tonight, the gallery had spoken, and Benjamin had listened. The whispers were faint, almost imperceptible, but they promised one thing: the truth was there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone who could read between the lines. And Benjamin Hard had no intention of leaving until he found it. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Whitaker's office, casting sharp lines across the polished wooden desk. Benjamin Hard moved silently, his fingers tracing the edges of drawers, examining the gaps and seams that most would overlook. Years of experience had taught him that secrets often hid in plain sight, behind false bottoms, behind panels carefully crafted to escape notice. And today, he intended to find every secret Whitaker's sanctuary held. His gaze fell upon a heavy leather-bound book, partially concealed beneath a stack of invoices and letters. The cover was plain, unmarked, almost deliberately unassuming. Benjamin's instincts flared, the placement was too deliberate to be random. He lifted the book, feeling its weight, the crispness of untouched pages. The ledger, he realized, was more than a record of transactions. It was a map of relationships, of favors, of debts and betrayals, meticulously recorded by a man obsessed with precision. Opening it, Benjamin's eyes scanned the entries. Names and dates, seemingly mundane, formed a lattice of connections that stretched across Manhattan's elite circles. Art dealers, collectors, auction houses, all intertwined with Whitaker's private dealings. Each entry was coded, a shorthand that revealed much to someone who understood the world of high-stakes art commerce. Benjamin's mind moved quickly, decoding patterns, tracing the subtle signs of influence and manipulation embedded in the pages. A particular set of entries caught his attention. Certain names were repeated, linked to a series of emergency transfers and private acquisitions. The language was cautious, almost conspiratorial, hinting at something darker than mere commerce. Benjamin noted the dates, the times, the unusual movements of funds and objects. Someone had been orchestrating transactions with precision and secrecy, hiding more than just artworks. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint creak of the door. Benjamin turned, eyes narrowing. A figure stood in the doorway, a young man with sharp features and wide, anxious eyes. I didn't expect anyone here," he stammered. "I'm Thomas, Whitaker's assistant. Please, don't touch." Benjamin raised a hand, calm and commanding. "I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to understand. Everything you know, everything you've observed, it matters." Thomas swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the ledger. "Some of it, it shouldn't be seen. There are people, dangerous people. They don't just want the art. They want control, leverage." His voice faltered, fear evident. Benjamin's gaze hardened. Fear was a language he could read, far more accurately than words. "Then tell me everything," he said, voice low but unyielding. "Every detail counts. The small ones are often the most revealing." For the next hour, Thomas recounted whispered conversations, discreet meetings, and late-night deliveries that had seemed innocuous at the time. Benjamin listened, occasionally interjecting with questions that drew out subtleties most would overlook. The ledger, combined with Thomas's recollections, painted a portrait of a network operating in the shadows, exploiting art as both currency and camouflage for more sinister purposes. Benjamin's mind raced. The patterns were emerging, connections forming where none had been obvious before. A series of fires, unexplained disappearances, subtle threats, it all pointed to a calculated series of manipulations. Whitaker had understood the danger but had been caught unprepared. Someone had moved against him with precision, exploiting weaknesses only a master manipulator could perceive. As he closed the ledger, Benjamin felt the familiar pulse of determination. The pieces were falling into place, each one a step closer to uncovering the truth. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the intricate web being unraveled in a quiet Manhattan office. Inside, a detective worked with relentless focus, tracing shadows and decoding intentions with the precision of a surgeon. Benjamin Hard rose, slipping the ledger into his briefcase. The game had begun in earnest. Every name, every transaction, every hidden motive was a thread he would follow to its origin. And he would not stop until the web of deception, meticulously woven around Whitaker and his collection, was laid bare. Somewhere in Manhattan, the architects of this chaos believed themselves untouchable. Benjamin Hard intended to prove them wrong. Benjamin Hard left Whitaker's office with the ledger secure in his briefcase, the weight of its contents pressing against his side. The streets of Manhattan seemed unusually quiet that afternoon, the typical cacophony softened as if the city itself held its breath. Yet Benjamin's mind was far from calm. As he reviewed the ledger and the details provided by Thomas, a familiar unease crept in, the kind he had felt only once before, years ago, when a seemingly ordinary case had erupted into something far more dangerous. He recalled the case vividly, a shadowy network, hidden behind layers of false identities and manipulated evidence, a group he had inadvertently exposed while assisting the police. The investigation had ended in arrests and public accolades, yet the victory had been costly. Not all threats had been neutralized. Some had disappeared into the city's underbelly, leaving a trace only a mind like his could detect. Benjamin's instincts, honed over decades, now whispered a chilling possibility: this fire, this disappearance, might be connected. He walked the streets with measured steps, scanning every passerby, every shadow. The ledger offered clues, yes, but intuition demanded more, a sense of timing, behavior, subtle signals that only a practiced eye could notice. It was during this quiet observation that a name leapt from the pages of the ledger, one he recognized immediately. It was a name he had encountered years ago, in that previous case, Vincent Armand. A dealer, seemingly legitimate, but with connections that had always skirted the edges of legality. Armand had vanished after Benjamin's prior investigation, rumored to have fled the country, yet here, subtly traced in Whitaker's ledger, was evidence suggesting he had returned. Benjamin's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression calm, blending seamlessly with the city around him. The past was rarely dormant, and he had learned that it often returned when least expected, carrying vengeance and unfinished business. He realized that Whitaker's predicament might not be random. Armand could have orchestrated the fire, manipulating events from the shadows, and now a more elaborate scheme was unfolding. His thoughts returned to Thomas's warnings about dangerous people exploiting art as leverage. The connections were no longer abstract, they had faces, histories, and grudges. Benjamin understood that solving the puzzle required confronting the past as much as navigating the present. He needed to anticipate the moves of those who believed themselves untouchable, and the only advantage he had was his memory, his analytical mind, and the ability to read people faster than they could conceal their intentions. That evening, in the quiet of his loft, Benjamin spread the ledger across his desk. The city outside was a tapestry of lights and shadows, but inside, the detective's mind worked with surgical precision. He mapped out the connections between Whitaker, Armand, and others whose names appeared repeatedly. Each line drawn, each pattern highlighted, revealed a chilling symmetry. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a calculated continuation of a story Benjamin had once been forced to conclude, now picking up threads left dangling, threads that could ensnare the innocent if not unraveled carefully. He poured himself a cup of green tea, the warmth grounding him amidst the growing storm. There was no room for error, no margin for misjudgment. The ledger had opened a door to the past, and through it, Benjamin glimpsed the scope of the danger. Every detail mattered: a misplaced signature, a delayed delivery, a coded note. These were not just clues, they were signals, messages from someone who believed their actions beyond detection. Benjamin lit a cigar, the smoke curling around him like a spectral reminder of countless nights spent dissecting crimes and human behavior. He leaned back, listening to the faint echo of the city, and allowed himself a rare acknowledgement: the past had returned, and with it, a formidable adversary. But he was Benjamin Hard, and he had never been one to shy away from shadows. The challenge was laid before him, and he intended to meet it head-on, tracing every thread to its origin, even if it led him through the darkest corners of memory and the streets of Manhattan alike. Benjamin Hard moved through Manhattan's evening streets with the calm intensity of a predator on a careful hunt. The ledger weighed heavily in his briefcase, yet it was not the only burden he carried. Memories of Vincent Armand and the unresolved dangers from his past lingered like shadows, whispering warnings he could neither ignore nor dismiss. The city around him bustled, oblivious to the game unfolding in its veins, yet every glance, every subtle gesture could reveal the truths hidden beneath polished facades. He had learned long ago that appearances were deceiving. People wore masks, the wealthy smiled while plotting betrayal, the seemingly loyal whispered secrets behind closed doors. Benjamin could read them as easily as one might read a book. Every hesitation, every flicker of the eye, every slight change in posture offered insight. And now, in the intricate web surrounding Whitaker's disappearance, the masks were beginning to crack. His first visit was to a small private auction house tucked into an unassuming corner of the Upper East Side. The manager, a slender man named Charles Vey, greeted Benjamin with practiced cordiality. Yet beneath the handshake, Benjamin sensed tension, a subtle quiver in the man's fingers betraying fear. "Mr. Hard," Charles said smoothly, "what brings you here?" Benjamin's gaze held him steady. "I'm here regarding Whitaker. I need a full account of recent acquisitions and any unusual requests." Charles hesitated, then, under the unrelenting scrutiny of Benjamin's eyes, revealed a series of transactions that had skirted legality. Names mentioned, items sold or acquired under false pretenses, and a few deals that suggested someone was building leverage over Whitaker's associates. As Benjamin absorbed the information, he noted contradictions in Charles's story, the subtle pauses, the avoidance of certain details. A careful observer would have called it nervousness, Benjamin called it concealment. Next, he visited a socialite known for her philanthropic work and close ties to Whitaker, Eleanor Crane. Her home, a mansion of pristine marble and gold inlays, exuded control and perfection. Yet Benjamin, with his practiced eye, saw irregularities, framed certificates slightly misaligned, a painting too high on the wall to be purely decorative, and a faint chemical odor that lingered in the air. Eleanor's conversation was graceful, precise, yet her laughter seemed rehearsed, and her compliments were slightly off, as if testing the waters for reactions. Benjamin noted every word, every expression, filing them away for later analysis. By the end of the evening, Benjamin had begun to untangle the network of deception. Certain figures, previously trusted by Whitaker, were now cast in a new light, some complicit, some merely pawns, and others dangerous manipulators. The masks they wore were sophisticated, designed to evade suspicion, but Benjamin had seen them before. Each persona, each carefully crafted smile, betrayed subtle inconsistencies that only a mind trained to observe could decode. Returning to his loft, Benjamin spread his notes across the desk. Photos, transaction records, and observations formed a growing mosaic of human behavior, a map of motives and opportunities. He sipped his green tea and allowed himself a moment to appreciate the clarity emerging from chaos. The path forward was becoming visible. By understanding the faces behind masks, he could predict movements, anticipate treachery, and corner the orchestrators of Whitaker's misfortune. But even as he pieced together the puzzle, a chill ran down his spine. There was one presence he could not yet identify, a silent observer who left no trace but whose influence was evident in the precision of the fire, the selection of stolen items, and the warnings left behind. Benjamin knew instinctively that the final adversary would not reveal themselves willingly. Shadows were not mere absences of light, they were deliberate, and those who moved within them did so with lethal intent. Lighting a cigar, Benjamin leaned back and allowed the smoke to curl around him, mingling with the faint aroma of aged paper and varnish from the ledger. Every mask he had identified, every subtle lie he had uncovered, was a step closer to the truth. Yet the true challenge remained unseen, waiting behind the final veil. In Manhattan, nothing was as it seemed, and Benjamin Hard, as always, was determined to see beyond appearances, to confront the hidden forces shaping the events around him, one careful observation at a time. Benjamin Hard's loft was dimly lit, the faint glow of the fireplace reflecting off the polished wooden floors and casting long shadows across the stacks of notes, photographs, and ledgers he had gathered. Outside, Manhattan throbbed with its usual ceaseless energy, oblivious to the intricate web of deception he was meticulously untangling. Inside, every detail mattered, every observation carried weight, and every decision was a step deeper into a labyrinth that seemed to twist endlessly. The connections were becoming clear, yet each revelation brought new questions. People he had trusted, figures he had once assumed were neutral or loyal, had begun to reveal hidden allegiances. The city, in all its grandeur and sophistication, had become a stage for a carefully choreographed dance of lies. Benjamin could feel the pressure mounting, a silent tension that hung over him like a taut wire. One misstep, one overlooked clue, and the labyrinth could close in, trapping him within its walls. His first lead took him to an exclusive club in Midtown, a place where Manhattan's elite gathered to exchange favors under the guise of civility. The velvet curtains and muted lighting did little to obscure the calculated glances, the whispered negotiations, and the subtle gestures of power. Benjamin moved through the room with deliberate calm, his eyes scanning every face, noting the angles of heads, the way hands lingered on glasses, the micro-expressions that betrayed hidden intentions. A familiar figure approached, a dealer named Marcellus Kane, known for his charm and ruthless efficiency in the art world. Kane greeted him with a courteous nod, but Benjamin detected the tension beneath the polished exterior. "Mr. Hard," Kane said smoothly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Benjamin's gaze was steady, analytical. "I'm following threads, Mr. Kane. And threads have a way of leading to people who prefer to remain unseen." Kane's smile tightened. "Be careful what you follow, detective. Some threads are dangerous." Dangerous indeed. Kane's warnings were subtle, yet Benjamin interpreted them as a challenge, a test of resolve. He knew that in this world, information was power, and misinformation was a weapon. Every lie, every half-truth, was a trap designed to mislead, to disorient, to create uncertainty. And the labyrinth was full of such traps. That night, Benjamin visited an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a location suggested by a vague tip from Thomas. The air was thick with salt and decay, the wooden planks beneath his feet creaking with every step. Shadows danced along the walls, distorted by the flickering light of a single, swinging lamp. Here, the lies began to twist and intersect. Crates marked with anonymous symbols, documents scattered carelessly yet deliberately, and a faint trace of the same unknown substance from Whitaker's apartment, all pointed to a network operating in plain sight yet hidden behind layers of deception. He reconstructed the movements of the individuals involved, noting patterns and inconsistencies. Every misdirection, every false trail, was an opportunity to anticipate their next moves. The labyrinth was complex, yet Benjamin's mind thrived on complexity. He moved methodically, recording observations, connecting dots, predicting reactions. The more intricate the web, the clearer the paths became to someone who refused to be deceived. By the time he returned to his loft, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. The city's rhythm resumed, its unaware pulse contrasting with the calculated tension Benjamin had navigated. He spread his notes across the desk, a visual map of intrigue, treachery, and hidden agendas. The labyrinth of lies had grown, but so had his understanding of it. And though the walls of deception seemed unyielding, Benjamin Hard knew that every lie contained a crack, and every crack was a doorway to the truth. Lighting a cigar and letting the smoke curl around him, he contemplated the next move. Somewhere in the shadows, his adversaries were plotting, confident in the illusion of control. But Benjamin Hard thrived in the chaos of deception, and the labyrinth, no matter how convoluted, was simply another puzzle waiting to be solved. The city lights of Manhattan flickered against the darkening sky as Benjamin Hard returned to his loft, the weight of the past days pressing on him with a quiet insistence. The ledger, the clues, the faces behind masks, they all converged in his mind like pieces of a puzzle scattered across a grand, intricate board. Each thread, each shadow, each whispered warning had led him closer to a single conclusion. The entire affair was a meticulously orchestrated game, designed to test his limits, to lure him into corners of the city and the human psyche few dared to enter. Benjamin spread the collected evidence across his desk. Photographs, receipts, ledger entries, cryptic notes, and his meticulous observations formed a network of interconnected patterns. He traced lines, marking relationships, timelines, and inconsistencies. Slowly, the hidden architecture of the crime emerged, each piece falling into place with the precision of a clockmaker assembling a masterpiece. One connection stood out, glaring in its clarity. Vincent Armand's name appeared repeatedly, interwoven with transactions and clandestine meetings that spanned months. The ledger entries suggested that Armand had been manipulating events long before Whitaker's disappearance, using the fire as a smokescreen to eliminate obstacles and to assert dominance over the network of collectors, dealers, and assistants who were inadvertently entangled in his schemes. Benjamin's mind raced as he pieced together the final steps of Armand's plan. The fire was not the first move, it was a distraction, designed to mask the theft of a single, invaluable painting hidden within the chaos. The ledger, cryptic messages, and subtle clues were breadcrumbs, leading not just to the location of the painting, but to the orchestrator of the crime itself. Each layer of deception had been intended to confuse, mislead, and ultimately wear down anyone who sought the truth. He reviewed the faces he had encountered: Laurent, Thomas, Eleanor Crane, Charles Vey, and Marcellus Kane. Each had a role, some willingly, some under duress, but each piece of their behavior now made sense. The misdirections, the omissions, the subtle lies, all contributed to the elaborate maze designed to hide Armand's ultimate goal. Benjamin could see the path clearly now, a series of moves calculated to perfection, yet leaving just enough trace for someone trained to observe. The clock ticked in the background, its rhythm a steady reminder that time was both an ally and an adversary. Benjamin considered the next steps with cold precision. The plan was clear: confront the hidden players, retrieve the stolen painting, and force Armand into the open. But he knew the danger was real. A single miscalculation could allow the adversary to vanish, leaving the threads tangled and the crime unresolved. He allowed himself a moment to breathe, the green tea in his hand warm against the chill of anticipation. The puzzle was complete in his mind, the edges of chaos had been aligned into a coherent pattern. Benjamin Hard's skill lay not just in observation, but in synthesis, the ability to transform scattered clues into an undeniable truth. The city outside continued its relentless pace, unaware of the quiet storm building within the walls of a Manhattan loft. Benjamin packed the ledger, photographs, and notes into his briefcase, each item a key to the unraveling mystery. He lit a cigar, the smoke curling lazily into the air, a silent companion to the contemplation that settled over him. Tonight, the final moves would be made. The pieces were in place, and the labyrinth of lies would be illuminated by the light of truth. Benjamin Hard was ready to confront the shadows, to follow the threads to their origin, and to bring the unseen hand orchestrating this intricate game into the open. The final puzzle was no longer a question, it was a challenge, and he intended to solve it completely. The night was heavy over Manhattan, the streets slick with recent rain and the occasional flicker of neon reflecting off the wet pavement. Benjamin Hard moved silently through the shadows, his coat pulled tight against the chill, briefcase in hand, mind sharp and focused. Every detail mattered, the sound of footsteps echoing against brick walls, the distant hum of traffic, the subtle scent of smoke lingering in alleyways. He was hunting not just a criminal, but a shadow, a master manipulator who had carefully orchestrated a web of lies and deceit. The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the harbor, a desolate structure that reeked of salt, rust, and old wood. Benjamin stepped inside, the boards creaking underfoot, and surveyed the darkness. His eyes adjusted quickly, detecting the faint outlines of crates, the subtle glint of metal, and the nervous movements of a figure waiting in the far corner. Vincent Armand emerged from the shadows, tall, confident, and dangerously composed, his presence commanding even in the dim light. "Hard," Armand said smoothly, a smirk playing across his face. "I wondered when you would find your way here." Benjamin's expression remained controlled, eyes narrowing with calculated intensity. "It didn't take long to follow the trail. You've been sloppy, leaving breadcrumbs for someone observant enough to notice." Armand chuckled, a sound without true amusement. "Sloppy? Every move was planned. Every detail calculated. You just happened to be in the right, or wrong, place at the right time." Benjamin took a measured step forward, analyzing the figure before him. "You underestimate me. You think chaos can hide your intentions, but every action, every lie, every fire, and every stolen piece of art left a trace. And I follow traces." Armand's smile faltered slightly, but only for a moment. "You're clever, I'll give you that. But cleverness alone won't save you tonight. Do you really think you can undo everything I've built?" Benjamin's gaze hardened, unyielding. "I don't need to undo everything. I just need to uncover the truth. The painting, Whitaker's safety, your manipulations, they end here." The tension was palpable, the silence between them punctuated only by distant city sounds and the faint drip of water from a leaky roof. Armand's eyes flicked toward a crate behind him, revealing a painting partially hidden beneath a tarp, Whitaker's prized possession, stolen under the cover of fire and deception. Benjamin stepped closer, his movements deliberate and controlled. "It's over, Armand. Return the painting, and perhaps the authorities will consider leniency. Resist, and everything you've schemed for will collapse." Armand's expression hardened, a flash of anger breaking through his composure. "You think this is simple, hard? You think a single confrontation will undo years of planning?" Benjamin's eyes met his with unwavering resolve. "It isn't simple. But the truth doesn't negotiate. Lies crumble when confronted, and you've built your empire on illusions. It's time they end." A tense moment stretched, the two men measuring each other, the weight of their intellect and experience pressing in. Then, with a calculated move, Benjamin advanced, his knowledge of Armand's patterns giving him the edge. Armand attempted to react, but Benjamin anticipated, disarming him and securing the painting. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Benjamin's strategy, patience, and understanding of human behavior had allowed him to prevail without unnecessary violence. Armand, now trapped, recognized that his web of lies had unraveled, and the truth, long obscured, stood unchallenged. Benjamin held the painting carefully, a sense of relief tempered by the understanding that justice in Manhattan was rarely clean or simple. The shadows were still there, lingering in the corners, waiting for the next game to begin. But tonight, he had won. The master manipulator had been revealed, the stolen art recovered, and Whitaker's safety secured. As he stepped out into the night, the city's lights reflected off the wet streets. Benjamin's mind was already tracing the final steps of the case, ensuring that no detail, no matter how small, had been overlooked. The confrontation was over, but the work of a detective never truly ends. The early morning light seeped through the tall windows of Benjamin Hard's loft, casting long, soft shadows across the wooden floors. Manhattan was waking, indifferent to the events of the night, its streets soon to bustle with the usual rhythm of commerce and life. Inside, Benjamin sat quietly at his desk, the recovered painting resting carefully behind him, protected, yet visible enough to remind him of the ordeal that had just concluded. He sipped his green tea, the warmth a small comfort against the lingering chill of tension and anticipation. The confrontation with Vincent Armand, the unraveling of the labyrinth of lies, and the rescue of Whitaker's prized collection were all behind him. Yet, as always, Benjamin's mind lingered on subtleties, the unfinished details, the implications, the shadows that might still persist even when the primary danger had been neutralized. Whitaker had been informed, grateful yet shaken, his relief mingled with disbelief at the intricate web of deceit that had threatened his life and livelihood. Thomas and Laurent had provided critical insights, their loyalty and courage helping to illuminate paths that might otherwise have remained hidden. Eleanor Crane and Charles Vey had been questioned, their roles in the network of manipulation clarified, and the authorities had taken over, ensuring that justice would continue beyond Benjamin's intervention. Benjamin reviewed the ledger one final time. Every transaction, every coded note, every subtle deviation from normal patterns had been analyzed and understood. The puzzle was complete, the threads woven into a coherent picture of human ambition, greed, and deception. He felt the quiet satisfaction of a job meticulously executed, yet also the weight of understanding the darker sides of human nature, truths that were rarely comfortable, but always necessary. The detective's gaze drifted to the small objects he had collected from the various scenes, a copper coin from the burned apartment, a fragment of a sculpture, a torn piece of parchment. Each was a silent witness to the story, a tangible reminder of the lives, fears, and ambitions entangled in the case. Benjamin often kept such trophies, not as mementos of victory, but as anchors to memory and understanding, subtle prompts to never forget the lessons each investigation imparted. As he stood and walked to the window, Benjamin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Justice, he knew, was not always immediate, nor always perfect. But it was deliberate, persistent, and guided by those willing to confront the shadows rather than ignore them. Manhattan's streets stretched below, teeming with life, yet oblivious to the quiet victories of the night. Benjamin recognized the delicate balance between order and chaos, truth and deception, and understood that his role, as always, was to navigate that balance with vigilance and integrity. Lighting a cigar, Benjamin inhaled deeply, the smoke curling around him like the wisps of thought that accompanied his reflections. The city's heartbeat continued beneath him, relentless and unyielding, but within the walls of his loft, there was a temporary stillness, a calm after the storm, a pause before the next mystery inevitably emerged. Whitaker's painting was safe, the conspirators exposed, and the stolen wealth restored to its rightful place. Yet Benjamin knew that shadows never truly disappeared, they merely waited. And as he sipped the last of his tea and listened to the quiet hum of Manhattan awakening, he was ready for the next shadow to emerge, the next puzzle to demand his attention. Benjamin Hard, detective, observer, and seeker of truth, allowed himself a brief, almost imperceptible smile. The night's work was done, justice had been served, and yet, in the interplay of light and shadow, he knew the city would always provide another challenge. And he would be ready, as he always was, to confront it.